What is up, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Knifecast. My name is Tyler, aka TovarishWorks, and I am joined by my two lovely co-hosts, Frank, aka Dr. Frunkey.
Hey everyone, Dr. Frunkey here.
And Josh, aka Echo Does Knives.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
So, real quick, we'll just go through what we carried today. Josh, tell us a little bit about what you had in the pocket.
I had a Wee Knives and Isham Eschaton. This was handed to me on loan by my friend Crew Jones. He goes by Crew Jones on Instagram and on Reddit, where I first met him at. And he sent it over for me to check out because I've been on the fence about buying one. And since I've had it the past couple of days, I want one so bad. So that's what I've had the past couple of days with me.
Nice. What about you, Frank?
Today I actually carried the Mini Typhoon by Brian Nadeau, but when I came home, I actually had a Benchmade Crooked River waiting for me from the, I actually customized it on the Benchmade site. I know that's a little bit weird maybe, but I just wanted to try it out.
It was also off-center, if I recall.
It was, unfortunately, of course, you know, as all Benchmades are from the factory. I was able to get it fixed up, but jeez, man, they need to get their stuff together. This may be the last Benchmade I ever buy. True story.
It wouldn't be a Benchmade if it wasn't off-center a little bit, right?
This is true.
That's right.
It's
totally right.
It's the trademark.
It's sad, yeah.
That's how you know it's genuine.
Well, I didn't leave my house today, so I didn't carry anything, but I did get a zirconium driver in the mail, which was nice. Pretty stoked to have that. And my Larevos should be coming back from Jason hopefully in the next week here, so those will be in my pocket a lot moving forward. Ooh. But as far as episode 4 is concerned, guys, the subject matter today is materials. We are super stoked to be able to talk to you guys about some stories behind where materials come from, some of our favorite materials on knives, and then maybe some pet peeves and little issues here and there that we can go over as well. So to head us off on this episode, we have Frank, who's got a bit of a list of things that he wants to go over to just kind of introduce us to materials and give everybody sort of a foundation for the rest of the conversation. So, Frank, take it away.
I appreciate it. Yeah, this is something that has kind of been on my mind because I might approach this topic of sort of materials matter in a different way than some people do. When I was in college, I got a degree in chemistry, and so that's kind of where my mind goes in terms of how and why something is better than something else in a knife. And so I was going to try to talk about different aspects of the knife and the things that we value, but talk about maybe why we value them. Why are these materials good? What are the physical and chemical properties that make these things good? So I was going to start out with the blade and talk about steels for the blade. Before I get going, I just want to recommend to everyone, if you're new to the knife game, or if you're not, you should check out the Z Knives app. I'm not being paid by anyone, but I think that most knife guys might have this at this point. It has all of the different steels and their compositions and talks a little bit about it. And you can learn a whole lot. So check out the Z Knives app. It's on your phone. It's also online through Google. So that's pretty neat. But I wanted to talk about steel and what makes a steel good for a blade. We use steel because it's hard and it lasts a long time and it forms a nice edge. But what makes steel? So steel is iron and carbon mixed together with some other atoms. But if you just put iron and carbon together, you're not really going to get an ideal material. Iron is very soft. Carbon is very hard. The molecules that they make form these structures, these crystalline structures that become hard up to a certain point. But if you add up to 6% carbon to iron, you're going to get something called cementite, and that's basically a ceramic, so it becomes too hard. So you only want about 1 to 2% of carbon in your steel. You know, sometimes it's a little bit less than 1%, but somewhere around 1% seems to be ideal. And then if you add in some other chemicals, you get some really interesting sort of phenomenon happen. If you add in chromium, about 12 to 14%, you're going to start to see that the steel doesn't rust as easily. We call that stainless steel. There's a lot of metallurgy in this that I don't actually fully understand, but it's something that I enjoy studying. One of the things that a lot of knife makers and bladesmiths really talk about is the idea of a carbide and how these carbides affect the structure of the steel. So a carbide is a carbon atom that's bonded to some other type of transition metal, whether that's iron, whether that's vanadium, tungsten, these other molecules or these other atoms, excuse me, that we would see in steels and things that everyone is always talking about. These actually do make a big difference. So if you're adding in X amount of vanadium or X amount of tungsten, the steel properties will change significantly in terms of things like hardness, toughness. This is a thing we call toughness. The real term is ductility. There's a thing we talk about, edge retention. How well does the edge hold? These are all aspects that are manipulated by changing the chemical composition of steel. And so then we get into steels that everyone knows is a good steel. You can just tell, anyone who's a knife nut will say M390 is a great steel. Well, why do we say that M390 is a good steel? Well, because it has a high amount of carbon, so it's very hard. It has a high amount of chromium, so it's very stainless. It has a high amount of tungsten and vanadium, and it forms nice, small, very fine carbides, and so the structure of the steel is very uniform and very strong. But it's not so strong and so hard that it's going to break, so it has good ductility or good toughness. And so, and also through the crystalline structure, it has good edge retention. And so M390 is coveted because we know that it cuts, but it's the chemistry behind it that really makes it fascinating to me. Now, is M390 the best steel in the world? Well, that really depends on what you need a steel for. Some people need really hard steels because they're going to be doing repetitive actions all day through rather soft material. So you might even want a harder steel than M390. We can talk about things like Maximet that have these incredibly high concentrations of tungsten, and so they're much harder, but they're more brittle. And then we can get into a new phenomenon that we're starting to see in the knife world, and that's nitrogen steels, things like Vanax and LC200N and the Nitro V and some of these other steels where you can replace the carbon with nitrogen and get similar crystalline structure and properties of the steel, but you lose a lot of the rusting and other corrosion that happens because of the carbon. So it's just interesting to me. So that's my rant on steels. I'm not going to talk about what the best steel in the world is. That just depends on your needs. So we'll move on to the handle materials. Handles are somewhere that have really exploded in terms of mostly just artistic design. The blade is the functional part of a knife in terms of what we're talking about, predominantly folding knives, but also in fixed blades. All knives need to have a good handle. And so, back in 1,000 years ago, people would hold it. They would have some cord of rope. They would have bone or wood or something. And up until recently, those same materials had been used in knife handles. But now harder materials and stronger materials are being used. And why we see in the folding knife industry, at least, that titanium is essentially ubiquitous in terms of knife handles, in terms of the frames, and a lot of other components in knives. And why is that? Well, titanium has a very strong strength, a very good strength to weight ratio. It's much better than steel. And what that means is that you can bend the titanium a whole lot, and it won't break. It won't fracture. Unlike steel, if you bend steel to its breaking point, it won't bend. It will fracture. And so titanium is very, very strong, and it functions well in that regard, but it doesn't work well in terms of forming a blade. It won't take a nice fine edge, and it doesn't hold that edge because it will bend more easily. It just doesn't fracture. It's very strong, so for the weight, it's much stronger than steel, but it won't fracture in the same way. And then you can take different types of titanium, you can forge them together, fold them over, stick them in the forge again, and you get things like Damascus. If you add a layer of zirconium to this sandwich material, you're going to get black Damascus or zircuti. And then we can start getting into all the new sort of composites and things that are man-made. We're getting into plastics and carbon fiber and other things like that. I'll talk a little bit about that, I suppose, in the next section of our discussion. Moving to the pivot, pivot science is something that is often, not discussed quite enough because there are things like washers that are made out of Teflon or phosphor bronze. These washers have good side-to-side strength, and they have low coefficients of drag, but they're not quite as smooth as, say, ball bearings. And so then you have ball bearings that can be made out of steel, or they can be made out of harder materials like ceramic materials, because you want a strong material that will provide a low amount of friction. And so lots of science going on into the development of each of these different parts. Something that I've learned more recently from discussions with custom knife makers is that the pivot itself and even the stop pin, these two materials sometimes need to be seriously considered, and they need to be treated and hardened just like the blade steels, because you need to have a material that is strong, but it's not going to break on you. So I recently saw the Grimsmo brothers talking about they harden their stop pins to 45 Rockwell, unlike blades, which tend to be somewhere in the high 50s to 60s Rockwell hardness. And so it's important to consider those things. And that's very scientific when you're discussing the construction of a knife. So that was kind of my rant on some of the different parts of the knife and kind of how I see it and why materials matter in terms of making a knife better. Better knives tend to have all of these different parts of the knife thoroughly thought out and developed and engineered to be better. And, I think we're going to get into talking about some of these materials and why we like them and, sort of our stories with a few of these materials.
Well, Frank, that was really epic, actually. I think that a lot of the knife community is going to find a lot of that information very valuable, just as I did.
Cool.
Yeah, very interesting stuff.
Sorry, I just ranted there for a little while, but, this is sort of, when I'm looking at a knife, this is sort of how I process things.
Absolutely.
Get your geek on.
Yeah, for sure.
No, that was great. So what we wanted to do from here was we sort of set up for each of us to do a little bit about materials. So we want to talk, maybe tell a story behind a material that we like, talk about some of our favorites, and then maybe discuss issues that we have with certain materials as well. So, Josh, do you want to go ahead and get us started on that?
One of the materials, since I've been into the high-end knives, and one of the first things that really caught my eye was superconductor. I didn't really know what it was. I knew it was used in superconductors, hence the name. But other than that, I was like, well, what's it doing on a knife? Where does it come from? What is it? And basically, most of the superconductor you guys see here in the U.S. knife market comes from the Texas Super Collider Project. And what that was in Texas, they were building a super collider in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. Funding fell through. Something happened. Not too sure on the full exact story on that. I just know they had a lot of the superconductor left over, and a gentleman, I think his name was Greg. He's the guy that started piecing it out and repurposing it and rebranding it and reselling it to knife makers, watchmakers, stuff like that as a premium product. What it is it's mostly copper. So when you think of superconductor, it's a premium material, but it's copper. Mixed in with that copper, and this is what you see that's the lighter silver color in the superconductor, is nickel nobium. It's nobium, right? Niobium. See, this is why we have a doctor on the show, guys, so we can say it's like niobium.
Niobium is the most conductive metal on Earth.
Cool.
The least resistance to electricity.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, and then the thing with superconductors is they're only really a superconductor when they're like near absolute zero. So as far as superconductor, it's just a cool name. It's not really going to be superconductive, so you ain't got to worry about carrying your knife in a thunderstorm or something. But going back to that, it's mostly copper with a little bit of that niobium mixed in, and or titanium rods. I've seen some with that, and that's what gives you that two-tone effect in the superconductor. And that's also what makes it extremely expensive to manufacture. It's mostly used in wire form, and one of its most prominent uses is actually in the medical field, and that's in MRI machines. And that's one of the many reasons why an MRI machine is hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars, is that material is expensive to produce, and an MRI machine uses miles of it. And it's also used in super colliders, the things that we're using in the world of science to figure out the God particle. Are tachyons an actual particle? Are they theoretical? How do we find these things? These superconductor materials are used in those colliders for those scientific experiments. And for me, like, that part makes it cool, right? I mean, it's on your knife. It looks cool. But, that's a material that we're using to further ourselves as a scientific and intelligent species. So it's kind of like a little throwback. You're looking at it and you're like, this is in Sweden right now in the Large Hadron Collider. And maybe this material is helping us figure out what lurks in the space between atoms. I don't know. That's just a deep thought from that. So that's that's the story of superconductor and what I found out in my cursory research.
I really want to get a knife with superconductor on it. I think it's absolutely a beautiful material.
It almost looks like mochame, right? But then it's got even more a deeper look. It's really cool stuff. But
yeah, I really like superconductor too. It's a really beautiful material. I definitely geek out about it because of the applications that it has. I mean, like I was mentioning, niobium is one of the best conductors in the world, if not the best conductor, and to just wrap it in copper, it has a deeper meaning, just like you were saying. It's very cool, and it looks beautiful.
I personally, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Tyler.
I personally,
no, you're good. Go ahead.
I really like it when the whatever the silver material is, whether it's niobium or titanium, I really like it when it's highly concentrated in the copper. Like the look, I think, looks way better when it's highly concentrated. A lot of people have been releasing stuff with it sort of just sprinkled in, which, I mean, it looks cool too. It's all personal preference, but I love it when like it's super concentrated and it just is like this grid of circles. It just looks dope.
Well, so I mean, I guess it's cut from wires, so it's always, if you look at the big cut pieces, it's just going to have the different densities of the niobium cores, so it's going to have, smaller ones or larger ones, and I guess that's how these guys are getting it. And from my understanding, there are basically two types. There's the big filaments, and then there's the small filaments, and I think you like the small filament one.
Yeah, but even then, I've seen them with different concentrations.
Yeah.
Some might have 6, rods in a given area, a 1 centimeter diameter circle, whereas others might have 12 rods.
Yeah. Well, I guess they're still making it from different places.
Yeah, I know most of our stuff came from that Texas Super Collider project, so it could be from different parts of that Super Collider machine.
I'm sure with the amount of mileage on the wire that there's more than one concentration and if it's so expensive to produce, you might get a less superconductory wire for this part versus a more superconductory wire for another part. Maybe it's very guessing, hard. It's a very hard material to actually research. There's not a whole lot of it out there on the web, but what is out there is worth looking up for anybody listening that thinks it's cool. It really is. There's a little bit more out there than what I've said, but like I said, it's like that's that first material that I really geeked out over. See, I'm not getting excited and I can't even talk because I'm geeking out over it. It's the first material
when I saw a high-end knife using it, I was like, man, I need to own a knife with that. Bouncing off that, some other materials that I really like, it's not as quite luxury or high-end as something like superconductor, is micarta. Micarta is one of those materials that has that warm, organic feeling to it. It doesn't feel cold and harsh like metal. It feels really nice in your hand. It's a really good material for a working knife, because as it gets wet or your hands get sweaty, the micarta itself will absorb that, and it will help keep a good grip. And there's different ways people can finish it. Micarta is something that I've always thought is just an understated, beautiful material. It's not flashy. It's not the most elegant, but it's like a pair of jeans, right? I mean, you can make micarta out of jeans, or jeans out of micarta, however which way.
I think
Other way around, yeah.
I don't know, yeah. I think
Maybe-
micarta jeans would be very uncomfortable.
It'd be so stiff, actually.
Like Lego legs.
Oh man, word slip there.
The new 511 models out of made out of micarta.
Yeah. Molly everywhere, micarta.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with Doug Marcata. But anyways, micarta is just one of those things. It's not fancy, but it's very well. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I just like it. Okay. Other than micarta, the another thing I really love is carbon fiber. Anything carbon fiber. I think Frank can agree with me on carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is such a cool material, aerospace.
Absolutely.
Origins. Matt Diskin actually controls a lot of the carbon fiber in the U.S. market that I've learned through research. So he gets a lot of it, and if it's not from him, it's aerospace seconds and stuff like that, stuff from NASA. We're going to talk a little bit more about a special type of carbon fiber that Tyler has a story on that I think it's an awesome story. I didn't know about it until Tyler introduced me to that story. I think you guys are going to enjoy that. For me, my favorite type of carbon fiber is something called blackwood carbon fiber. And it's basically, if you guys have ever seen crosscut micarta, and it has those, it's just the end cut of carbon fiber. But to me, it's very unique. It plays with the light very well. Frank and I had a conversation about it. He doesn't like it as much as I do, but it's such a cool.
I like it.
Yeah, but I was like, I geek out over it, and Frank and I were having a conversation, and I was geeking out over it, and he's like, dude, it's just end cut carbon fiber. It's like, I know, but that's cool. It's not. It's different.
It is. I agree.
And then one more thing I just want to put in here, as far as stuff I like, when it comes to high-end blade materials, I really think Damasteel has a spoiled for me, opposed to any other Damascus. And I know there's some exceptions. There's some people making some crazy Damascus, but Damasteel, when it's etched properly, is some of the most beautiful blade material that I've seen. There's some other cool stuff that they can do with it as well. But for me, Damasteel over, because with the Damasteel, the thing I always love about Damasteel is way more stainless than there is that high carbon content. And it seems like with all the other Damascus, it's reversed, right? They've got, most of the regular Damascus uses AEBL, and then they use some type of high cobalt or high nitrogen steel to make that difference. But with the Damasteel, it's the exact opposite, and I love that look. And it's particle metal ergy, so it's a higher performance than your standard AEBL. Not to get lost in the minutia there, but Damasteel is something that I would prefer to have 99% of the time over some of your more normal Damascus that you will find. Not that I don't like it, it's just Damasteel to me is better. And then real quick on the stuff I dislike, especially on high-end pieces, is G10. G10 is a great material, but I feel like it's a great budget material. Same thing we talked about, how Will Moon is using aluminum, and it's the higher grade aluminum, 776, right, guys? Is that the number on the aluminum?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the higher. That's like the highest in aluminum. It's supposed to be very high quality aluminum, but still it's aluminum. If you start hearing about aluminum GN on knives that are costing $400, $500, $600 to $1,000, I generally get very turned off very quick, just because I don't associate those with high-end luxury items, high-end luxury knives, and high-end.
I had a hard time. I had a hard time justifying. I had that Marfione, the Microtech Bounty Hunter, the Combat Troodon. It was aluminum, but that thing cost $785. $785, and I was like, aluminum?
That's just stupid to me. Yeah, it's just there's no reason for it other than, I mean, there's no reason for it to me on something that costs that much money.
Yeah, it's just greed. We can say it is greed. It's fine.
Yeah, that's my little spiel on my little story and what I like, what I don't like. It's like with everything in this high-end market and in this hobby, it's all subjective. But that's where I'm standing on most of the materials and everything. What do you guys got?
Yeah, so thanks, Josh. Appreciate that. That was sweet. So in terms of telling stories, I want to talk a little bit about the origins behind Lightning Strike carbon fiber. And before I get any deeper, I want to kind of specify, within the knife community, we like to talk about materials a lot. And over time, I think people have gotten a little bit universal with their terminology. So just for some clarity for this conversation, Lightning Strike carbon fiber is carbon fiber with a copper weave. And then Silver Strike carbon fiber is carbon fiber with I don't know what material they use for the silver colored wire, but it's a silver weave. And then you can have Mylar carbon fiber, which is what you see with the like really shiny reflective stuff that like balloons are made out of, is mixed in the weave. And then there's carbon fiber mixed with G10, which oftentimes you'll see it'll be like blue G10 or red G10 mixed into the carbon fiber weave. But anyway, so when I say Lightning Strike carbon fiber, I'm referring to the copper weave. So as Josh mentioned before, it sort of comes from the aerospace industry. So what happened was, a little over 30 years ago, we stopped making planes out of metals and started making them out of composite materials. And planes are subject to lightning strike hits generally 1 to 2 times per year. And so what was happening is if a plane got struck by lightning, when it was made out of a composite material, the current would search for, everything that it could to go through. And so what you would do is you'd fry all of the like the wires and stuff, and any components that were like made of metal and stuff would melt. And so obviously it was a huge issue. So there were many different composite materials developed to address the issue of giving the current somewhere to go. And one of those developments was Lightning Strike carbon fiber. So it's carbon fiber with a copper wire weave. And so if you make a component out of that and it's struck by lightning, the copper wire is able to disperse the current, which I think is super cool. And the fact that, I have that on knives sitting in front of me right now is pretty sweet.
I don't think I realized that was the story behind it. Where did you hear that?
Well, I had been introduced to the concept of it coming from the aerospace industry and being designed to absorb the current, just through friends over being a knife guy. And then in terms of understanding some of the differences and getting some of the facts of when we developed it and the specific issues that we experienced before we developed it, that was from research for the podcast.
Sweet.
Yeah, I will say, before I heard that story, I always thought they meant like for the silver or the copper to look like that it's been struck by lightning, or like it looks like a lightning bolt shape. I don't know. That's what I always thought.
For sure.
I heard that blew my mind when I heard that. I was like, that makes so much sense, and that's cool as hell.
Yeah, it's definitely an easy material to misunderstand at a glance. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up. Something else that I wanted to touch on was mammoth molar, because what I'm finding is I have mammoth molar on a pen now, and I took it to work, and it didn't seem anyone wanted to believe me that it was real. And I think that concern is because of the idea that, you know, fossils aren't that readily available. Like, how are you getting mammoth tooth, right?
Yeah.
But for anybody who doesn't know, so for anybody who doesn't know, mammoths aren't that old. Mammoths were roaming the Arctic all the way up until the Egyptians were building the pyramids 4,000 years ago. So, like, there's a lot of available mammoth fossils, essentially. And so a mammoth molar fossil isn't all that rare. Go on eBay or just Google mammoth molar, and you can buy an entire full-size square-foot mammoth tooth for like $600 to $900. And so the way that it ends up being a material used in knives or pens is the person who develops the material will buy a molar fossil, and if you go look at images of it online, it's pretty cool. You can really see where the patterns in the finished product come from in terms of the shape of the tooth. And so what they'll do is they'll slice it into slices, and depending on whether or not they do that horizontally or vertically will determine the sort of types of patterns that you see with the enamel in the molar. And then with each sheet that they have, they dye it so that that's how you get green and blue and red and all kinds of cool colors on the material. And then, of course, they finish it with, I don't know, some sort of epoxy or whatever to give it that nice, shiny, clean look and to be able to sell it to knife makers or whoever who can then, fashion it into whatever shape they would any other material just with stock removal. So that's pretty interesting. It's funny, people really, don't think it's real, but it's totally real.
It's strange to me to think that it's like teeth,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it appeals to me quite as much.
I had this exact same
it's like a super high-end thing, and everyone is like so crazy about it. It's on the most expensive knives ever, but it's like, it's teeth.
You're walking around with elephant teeth.
Yeah.
I think that's super appealing. I think that's super cool. Totally. Yeah. You're like walking around with history.
I mean
it is neat in that way. But, to take the next logical step, dude, I want freaking T-Rex teeth on my high-end knife.
Well,
T-Rex
what I was going to say is what about a saber-toothed tiger's saber tooth?
Yeah, there you go. Now you're talking.
Cool.
Yeah.
Something else to bring up is that sometimes there is confusion between mammoth molar, which is otherwise sometimes referred to as mammoth tooth, in addition to versus mammoth ivory. So mammoth ivory is often referred to as mammoth bark, and it has a different appearance than the mammoth molar. So on the molar, you can always tell it has this sort of oval shapes of enamel, whereas the bark will look, or the ivory will look more like shred carbon fiber almost. It's kind of like flat and very vertical, and lots of straight lines. So there is that distinction to be made too. I find that mammoth ivory tends to be more rare, at least on knives, because it's less popular, just because it doesn't quite have the same crazy look to it. But that is something to consider. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention, I was going to talk about it in the next section, but I think it's actually better to talk about it here. It's a material called Fordite. And I know that the fellow gentlemen on the podcast know what this material is. But for anybody who doesn't, it's not a material, first of all, that I've ever seen in knives. And the reason I added it in my next section was because in terms of materials that I like, I want to get a maker to make me Fordite scales. It's never been done. I don't think anybody knows what it is. And it's not very cheap either. So it would definitely drive the price of a knife up. And I don't know if you could actually fashion it into scales without it completely crumbling. But all Fordite is from the old Chevrolet and Ford factories towards the section where cars are painted, along the legs of the posts that are legs of the assembly line, have had paint drip down them for decades, and that paint gets to the bottom of the pillar and just sort of starts building on itself, in the same way that sediment, is created. And so it's gotten to the point now where they're ripping these things up out of these old factories, and they're, they're 6 inches to 12 inches in diameter, and they're just chunks of paint, but it's thousands of layers of paint. It looks like looking inside a candy tree trunk. And it's just super cool. So that's like my life goal, is to get somebody to make me something out of Fordite.
It's also known as Detroit City agate. That's
correct.
That's another word for it, and it reminds me of gobstoppers, or like the really big jawbreakers.
Yeah,
so it's really cool stuff. I would love to see some inlays, or
is it solid enough to make that? Can you like impregnate it with resin?
It's been hardened. Oh. It's super hard. They use it in craft jewelry making.
They do use it?
Boutique jewelry. Yeah, in jewelry making.
Okay.
That's where I've seen it the most, like the boutique and craft style jewelry. I've seen it there.
I'm sure it would piss off a knife maker, but all materials piss off knife makers. So, I mean, true. It's totally true. So I think it's doable. Okay, so as far as materials that I like, first up is I've released a ton of videos on Josh's Gavcos recently on my channel, and what a lot of them have in common is Timascus and black Timascus, which is, rather than being finished with a torch, are finished with an acid etch alongside electro anodizing. And what you get when you do all that correctly and in the right order and with lots of experience is a fucking dope looking handle. In fact,
absolutely.
Yeah, the one-off that Josh has, and my video on that should be out in a couple weeks, has a certain quality to it that I've only ever seen on carbo quartz. So I sort of lovingly refer to it as carbomascus, because it's just, no one else has made a material like that. It's absolutely stellar. There's a few other makers that are doing the acid etch electroanodizing finishing, but nobody does it quite like Mike. And that one particular one-off is on a completely different level than all the other examples that I've seen, in terms of its just dimensionality and its reflectivity. But so yeah, that's been one of my favorite materials, certainly. And then alongside that, I really like Silver Strike carbon fiber and like Mylar carbon fiber. I think they're super beautiful. I really like Mammoth Molar, as I mentioned before. And I also really, really like Carbo Quartz. And I know Frank is going to get into that a little bit, and we've mentioned it already. But so Carbo Quartz, I'm getting it on a watch clasp that I have coming, and that's going to be my first piece that's ever been in my collection. It's really hard to get a knife made with it, especially a reasonably priced knife. But I've tried a lot of knives with Carbo Quartz on them at knife shows, particularly at New York Custom Knife Show. There was a little bit of it at Blade Show that I stumbled across. In fact, Jason Overall, the maker of some of my Larevo knives, he had a Carbo Quartz Tribeca, which my friend Winger owns now, and I'm really bummed that I don't own that knife. I've tried to buy it from him, and he won't sell it to me. But Jason was the one who introduced me to Carbo Quartz and sort of told me how it's made and what it's made out of, which I'll let Frank get to in a minute here. But that was my first experience with it, was seeing it on one of Jason Overall's knives. And then when I was at New York Custom Knife Show and sort of knew what I was looking for a little bit more, it was on a ton of knives. And man, it just has... It's just, if you've never seen it, don't ever look at a picture of it and think you know what it is, because it's all about the way that it plays with light when you see it moving. So Carbo Quartz in a still image is not anything compared to Carbo Quartz moving. And so I just think it's absolutely gorgeous. In terms of things, pet peeves that I have with materials, one, my issue with Timascus, as much as I love it, and it's on a lot of my clips, is that, like, if you make a scale out of it, as soon as you touch it, right, it's super conductive of, like, fingerprints. And so your fingerprints get all over it, and it sort of changes colors. It usually loses a lot of its vibrancy and a lot of its glossiness. And then worse than that, if you do make a scale out of it and you have sweaty hands, it's a super slippery material. So I just wish... that's another thing that I like about the Gavco Timascus, is that it's a matte finish, and so it's really good to hold. And then one other quick thing to mention is like with the Lightning Strike carbon fiber and Silver Strike, it's really important that a maker finishes it correctly. Because if it's not finished correctly, what you actually get are those little wires, they start to bend. And they start to poke out of the scale or the bolster or whatever it is. And so you actually start getting stabbed by these little wires. And it's a real son of a bitch. So make sure you're buying that material from makers that know what the hell they're doing. Because otherwise it's going to be a pokey nightmare. So Frank, you got us started on this adventure. Why don't you take us out of it?
Okay. Well, I think that each of us has sort of been doing a story on some different material, and both of you touched on this briefly, but I wanted to talk about this material, carbo quartz. This is something that's sort of come onto the scene over the last year or so, and it's a very interesting material. I know that Tyler is geeking out over it over there. It's beautiful, and it's weird. It's a weird material. In learning about this, it's created by a company called North Thin Ply Technology. This is a company that specializes in making fiber composites, carbon fiber composites, and other thin ply materials. They have partnered with McLaren automotive engineering department, as well as some other people, and they've developed these amazing composite technologies. They've had their components in Formula One cars, Le Mans racers, and jewelry. I know that there's a watchmaker out there called Richard Mille, and he makes these incredibly high-end watches, these beautiful, intricate things. Now, I'm not into watches so much. Some of you may gawk at this, and some of you may laugh at my lack of knowledge, but he makes these spectacular knives that cost above $100,000, $150,000. And he has been putting in these North Thin Ply Technology composites, and one of them is carbo quartz. This is a material that they have developed. Their headquarters is in Switzerland, but their factory is in Poland. They've developed this material where they take carbon fibers and they straighten them out, and they put them all in the same direction and in the same plane, and then they fuse it with quartz. And I'm not really sure how they do that. I've really only done sort of a cursory review of their website, trying to understand the science behind it. Of course, they're not going to share their proprietary technology, but they fuse the carbon fiber strands in a matrix of quartz, and it makes this very tough and strong and also beautiful material. And so when you see it, it has these layers to it. Some of them are reflective, some of them are matte. It looks really nice in the knife community because you can pair it with things like Damascus and Damasteel very well, because it has that same sort of wavy patterning to it. But it's a fascinating material, and I'm excited to see knives come out with it. We were just watching an auction today of one of the Lee Lerman knives, right? And it went up to $9,000. So, and it had some carbo quartz on it with some Damascus. So some of these super, super high-end knives are starting to have it, and maybe we'll see it trickle down. I saw some rumors out there that there may be a Chris Reeve Sebenza offered with carbo quartz inlays one of these days. So it may trickle down into the mid-range to who knows where.
Let me add to some of that. So you had mentioned the fusing of the quartz. So based on talking with Jason overall, from what I remember, that was almost a year ago, but from what I remember from that conversation and just studying the material, I believe it's just layers where they take the quartz and they cut it at extraordinary thin layers, and then it's sort of layered on top of one another in the same way that you do the G10 carbon fiber, where it's just a super ultra thin layer of G10 and ultra thin layer of carbon fiber. They lay it all on top. They connect it with some sort of, I don't know, epoxy or something. And then if you round the material, if you contour it, then you really start to see all the layers, because, at every sort of, I don't know, 100th of a millimeter or whatever, there's like a new layer of material. And so if you contour it, you start to see the steps of material. But yeah, so I think it's just the quartz is like sheets, and it's just sheets stacked on top of each other. I could be wrong about that. And then in regards,
they have to be sort of fused in some way. I can't figure it out. They don't talk about how they do it.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
I'm sure it's a close guard
if someone
secret.
could explain it to us, that would be awesome.
And then you mentioned the watches. The Richard Mille watches are super dope, and I think they're probably the most well-known for having it. A lot of the frames for his watches are made out of it. But other watch companies do use it. I'm pretty sure my friend has a Panerai that's made out of it, so you don't have to spend 150 grand to get it in a watch. And then were you going to touch on like sort of the how to get it aspect of it? Because like we were talking about earlier.
Honest, I don't really know. What I do understand, and we've talked about it, is that there's kind of only one place to get it in the U.S. Maybe you can enlighten us on that.
There's a guy named Jim, and I met him at New York Custom Knife Show. Very briefly, I saw him. But I think he has exclusive rights to deal the material in the U.S., which is why it's so difficult to find. If you look him up on Instagram, he's just at CarboQuartz. He's been like buying up his own supply on knives. Like he bid $7 grand on that Lee Lerman. And he also just bought the Collazo, the Will Collazo Bushido with CarboQuartz that I tried to buy. But it was already his. But so it's interesting. He seems to be just like a knife guy who somehow got a hold of these distribution rights and is just using the sale of CarboQuartz to fund his knife hobby of buying knives with CarboQuartz is what it seems to be, which I'm totally okay with that. I think that's awesome. But yeah, he seems to just be an enthusiast. If you go look at his Instagram, it's just sheets of CarboQuartz and pictures of knives with CarboQuartz.
And we got to figure that out. We got to find some new rare material and just get the distributorship for it and go to town.
I'm telling you, Fordite's the next
Great
one, man.
monopoly.
You can get a bunch of it on eBay right now. I'm going to lead that charge.
Nice.
Anyway, continue.
Well, so CarboQuartz, very, very interesting material. And, I think Josh kind of touched on, I'm going to transition into materials that I really like. I certainly like carbon fiber and carbon fiber composites. Recently, I've been trying to sort of explore the different ones that are available for knives. I sort of have been speaking to the folks who make this stuff. There's a guy out there on Instagram. He goes by Carbon Plate. He makes the copper and gold dust carbon fiber. So he sprinkles this real copper and real gold dust into the resin and then makes, carbon fiber out of it. And it's, when you mill it out, it's this beautiful stuff. And I've been enjoying those recently. There are these copper shred carbon fibers. It's not exactly the same. It's like chunks of carbon fiber with some little copper bits in there. There's forged carbon fiber. There are all different types, and certainly CarboQuartz. So I'm interested. I like carbon fiber basically from a chemical perspective because it's like carbon, and it's very simple and very strong. And carbon fiber has been used in like we talked about, the aerospace industry for quite a while. Obviously, Formula One, Le Mans cars. I'm also kind of a car geek, so I love it in there. So it's cool to see it on knives. But as for a different sort of topic, a material that fascinates me is mokume. And mokume, it comes from the Japanese word mokumegane, and that apparently means like wood-like or appears like wood. And that has to do with what the material looks like. It's usually a combination of copper with a couple of other things. And you can have like brass, you can have silver, you can have some other materials in there, but it's generally these kinds of softer metals: copper, brass, nickel, silver, these kinds of things. And they're forged in such a way that they form layers that look a lot like Damascus or Damascus. And I've watched it online how they make this stuff. It's a different process because of the properties of the metal. But what comes out is this beautiful coppery, silver, almost liquid-looking material. And when people do it right, it's super beautiful to me. I really enjoy materials that patina, like copper. I have a bunch of copper on a bunch of my knives. And this material patinas in a very unique way. Some of it stays shiny, some of it tarnishes a little bit, And so not only is it beautiful right away, but it develops its own sort of personality over time. I really want to get more mokume in my knife collection. I find it very hard, though, to find a knife with mokume on it, a good knife with mokume on it.
Well, okay, let me jump in there. If you want a knife with mokume, you talk to my man, JD Vandeventer. You get yourself
JD.
Oh, JD.
Thanks for that, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, that'll go down in history right there. That's amazing.
Good stuff.
Instant meme.
He makes knives with mokume probably more than anybody else I've seen, and obviously your collection is void of other than Gareth Bull South African knives. So
okay, let me run this by you. What if I asked him for a gold with mokume on it?
He would do that. He's already done it, is the point I'm trying to make. If you look at my friend Mike... What?
I'm going to message him right now.
Yeah, okay, good. My friend Mike just took delivery of his dress mini gold with mokume 2 weeks ago.
It looks nice.
I also want to mention mokume doesn't only come with those materials. I was looking at this Larevo knife that Empire Outfitters might even still have for sale, and the bolster was like black, and then it looked like it had silver powder in it.
And yeah, that's like that M3 stuff, right?
Well, M3. I've read about M3. M3 is a little bit different. I've seen M3 on a Gavco knife that's on Robertson Customs, but
yeah.
the Larevo, the material on the website says mokume. So I actually reached out to Jason and I was like, "What?" I was like, "Is this wrong?" And he was like, "No. There's like all kinds of different." He was saying that it like refers to the way that it's made, but that the materials can be different. So I don't know anything about
definitely.
that.
I don't know what they all can be, but it's generally like these softer metals. It's not like steel and titanium. It's these softer sort of I don't know, presentation metals.
My understanding of mokume, and I think when anybody hears mokume, they think of exactly what you're talking about. But I was just saying that it was weird to see that that's not only what that means.
Well, this is another opportunity for somebody to educate us. If somebody sees this and wants to leave a comment or send us a letter talking about it, I would love to learn more about it.
M3 is really cool too. Just Google it. The first hit on Google, if you look up M3 composite material, is this website that develops it, and they have a great little blurb of like what it is. It's like 3 paragraphs, and it's super informative. So if you're interested in learning about materials you've probably never heard of on knives, that's one to go check out.
Cool.
And one of the cool things about mokume is, I'll make this real quick because we spent a lot of time on it, but it's a cool material. My friend Ian, CMF Metalworks, he uses it a lot. He has a lot of it. And one of the things he told me is when he makes a knife with it, to start the patina process that everybody loves. He just eats like some really greasy potato chips, and then he fondles the knife, basically. And what he told me is by doing that, it really sets in the start of the patina, and in a couple of weeks, it gets that that contrast everybody loves. So I thought that was cool. That was funny. That he always told me to do that with the mokume. If I ever got a mokume product, is eat some really greasy chips or something, and then play with it for a little bit and let it sit, and that starts that patina process everybody raves about.
I throw some salt on there. Make it happen. It's good. Well, I guess the third part of this was talking about materials that we have issues with. And I wanted to start out kind of by echoing what Josh said. I really don't enjoy the use of crappy plastics on higher-end knives. I think plastics, even like G10, have a place in user knives in the lower end. But in these higher-end knives that we're looking at, to see plastic being used almost at all is a huge disappointment. And that does not include like resins and stuff and carbon fibers, but it's the G10s. But something that I wanted to discuss as a small issue that I have with some knives is poorly flamed Timascus. So Timascus is a beautiful material, and maybe we didn't discuss it in depth, but basically if you take two types of titanium, sandwich them together, and then heat them up in your forge and fold them and fold them and fold them, you get a funny pattern, and that's called Timascus. It can either be uniform or not uniform, whatever you want. But in order to make that material beautiful, the majority of people will use basically a blowtorch and heat the material up, and the two different materials will differentially color based on the heat. You can also electroanodize it, just like what Tyler was saying earlier. But the worst thing to me is when a high-end knife maker produces a high-end knife with Timascus on it, but the Timascus looks like barf. Like it's just not. The color is off. The colors are not nice colors. I really enjoy it when the Timascus pops with a powerful like purples and sort of reddish pinks, and when it's a really deep and rich color. And some people are amazingly good at achieving this, and some people really aren't. And some people have wild inconsistencies, and I wonder kind of what happens, and maybe people get better over time. But I think that that's something that kind of annoys me. I don't know if you guys have ever felt that way about a knife.
Well, yeah, I think there's two different arguments to be made, or two different points to be made based on that point, which is one, sure. You said like looks like barf. Are you referring to the ones where it's like almost all bronze?
No, kind of like where the colors don't have good... I don't mean physically looks like barf, maybe. Right, okay. I think it's just like the colors are not well differentiated. They're not bright. They're not, to me, just unappealing colors, kind of faded, so almost pastel colors.
That's the distinction that I wanted you to make. So yeah, there's definitely like a glossy finish versus like a satin finish. I feel like some makers try to finish their Timascus with like satin or just like matte, and it doesn't look good. It looks old. And I also think a lot of that is from like if it's just touched a lot and nobody ever Windexes it. Because, you can hit pretty much any Timascus with some Windex and it'll waken right back up.
Yeah, polish it up.
Yeah. I kind of meant like just in terms of the colors they achieve from their initial, anodizing or flaming.
Right.
Yeah.
Something else that I'd like to bounce off with there is I have a similar issue with, really, Josh was talking earlier, he said Damasteel is great if the etch is done right. And I really hate it when somebody dips Damasteel in an etch in the acid for like 2 seconds and it comes out and it's like light gray and there's no clarity to it.
Yeah, that ghost color.
Yeah, it just looks like trash. Good Damasteel etches are, the Damasteel is almost black. Right, it's like almost black, and it's very crisp. Like the defined edges of the black versus the steel color is clean, and there's not like a feathering to it.
Yeah, you have to have that contrast. That's what makes it pop.
Yeah, I don't have a knife with Damasteel that's mine. I just don't have a thing for it, I guess. I don't know. Not my thing right now. It will be. When I have a lot more money to burn, it will be.
Yeah,
probably.
Right. I'm not actually into owning Damasteel at all, personally. Yeah. But that all just boils down to personal preference. Cool. Well, thanks. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate all the insight. I think that was really cool, actually. I think we touched on a lot of stuff that people have wanted to hear touched on for a long time. So to take us out of this one, as far as notable news is concerned, today the public was introduced to the Spider Cove Sabotage. For those of you unfamiliar, the Sabotage is one of the defining models from Nady, who is an Israeli knife maker. That's a bit of a tongue twister. The Sabotage, of course, a model that the user or sort of lower end material versions of it go for anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000, and the high end dress versions can go from $4,000 to $8,000. It's absolutely insane, and so that model has now been announced as an upcoming Spyderco model. I think there are some mixed feelings on this subject. I don't know if you guys have anything to say.
I know you do. I'm personally excited because I like the design of the Sabotage. I think it's pretty cool. I held one actually over at Slice Fine Knives. I got to handle one with Matt over there. But it seems like a pretty practical knife if it was actually like in a user format. Big blade, kind of interesting curvature and ergonomics, and I'm excited to see it come into the market. I wonder, what the materials and the price point will be. They show it in this bright orange G10, which is just not ideal in my opinion, but we'll see. I'm excited about it.
It's made by the Taichung factory. I could see that. I could tell it's going to be a Taichung knife.
Let's hope so.
That's what the pre-production or the prototype one that he had was a Taichung. It had the Taichung branding. You guys can go on his Instagram and look at it and see what you guys think about it. Real quick about it, as far as like a production version of his knife, I really wish Spyderco wasn't the one he went with. For me, I would like to have saw a different company, somebody like Millet or we were talking about this earlier, and I think like CKF or somebody could really have done some really amazing work and kept it around that $400 or $500 mark, so you still get like a more of a high-end feeling without paying all of your savings into one knife. That's what I think about it. They lost the flipper tab. They added a spider hole, which I mean, I'm not against. I'm not for. It just doesn't feel like the real deal, which it shouldn't, right? You still gonna need to have a reason to spend $5,000 on a knife.
Yeah.
But as far as a business perspective is concerned, Black Snow Customs would have been stupid to say, no, I don't want Spyderco to make this, because we were talking about this earlier, and Spyderco has a far reach. So if that's going to get more people into the high-end knife market and more people thinking about these high-end and custom knives, then I'm all for it, and I know I am definitely going to buy one because the Sabotage has always been a grail knife of mine.
Well, I'll tell you, that's exactly what happened to me. I bought a Spyderco Nirvana, like as one of my early quote-unquote high-end knives, and I learned about Peter Rosenti, and the rest is history. I've owned a couple of his knives now. Now, his aren't as expensive, but, if this brings attention to Nadi and his work, and somebody else can buy one of his $8,000 knives and keep him in business, more power to him. That's great.
Yeah. It's a good thing.
I don't think the thing is the markets are so disparate. There's a problem with like ZT making a Hinderer because those knives are so close in price. But like when you're talking about a $300 knife versus a $5,000 knife, then I think that there's not really so much of a competition. So I think his knives will be safe.
Oh yeah, definitely. No matter who makes it, pretty much. His knives to me are the blending point, the gray area when you start going away from tactical knives as the category and you start transitioning into art knives, because a lot of handwork and a lot of things that you would see on an art knife, these guys such as Black Snow Customs and Lee Lerman, they're doing those things to those knives. Just seeing that.
When I held it in hand, I couldn't help but think that like that could actually be a very functional blade shape for the right user, but it's just so high end. People won't even cut paper with those knives probably.
No, I wouldn't. I would like wear white gloves like he does. Yeah, you would. Yeah. You're a madman.
I would dig up rocks with it.
Yeah, stop talking about the freaking rocks.
I would baton rocks with it.
But the Spyderco one, I'm gonna buy one, and I'm gonna carry it because, like you said, that blade shape, man. Yeah, I'm gonna carry it. Yeah, I'm gonna love that knife.
They have the potential to make the big one and the mini one, so that'll be, Spyderco might do that.
I hope he licenses Opiate as well. That's his other model.
No. Okay.
Hey,
we'll see. Well, I would love to see. I think Tyler, you mentioned this earlier. I would love to see them. I would love to see one of these knives go to somebody like, I hate to say ZT, but like ZT, Riot, maybe Millet, one of these sort of higher end mid-tech companies that could really make it like super nice, but in the sort of $500 to $800 price range. That could be cool.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Cool.
Tyler,
I have nothing. I have no words.
No comment.
Non-flipper mid-tech? Yeah, man. Somebody
Let's do it. A non-flipper made by CRKT. Let's do it.
So
in all plastic, dude. Make it $40.
I don't know if I'm allowed to.
Tyler's head will explode.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And if my friend who told me this wants to slap me on the wrist, then fine. Stan Wilson has already gone to all of the production companies to try to develop a production non-flipper flipper, and that was a while ago, and it never happened because none of the production companies could manufacture the non-flipper flipper at a price point that made sense.
He needs to take it.
That's crazy, though. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
What did you say, John?
They need to take it to Wii. I mean, Wii made this Eschaton, and
but those aren't even comparable. The Eschaton has nothing mechanically interesting about it. It's just cut out. Okay.
Listen to what I'm saying. It's a design that was made with the intent to never be made into an actual knife. It was a thought process, and then we turned it into one.
Well,
I don't know.
It's still mechanically
just a
very
flipper.
simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they could do
like, for example, the ZT0055. It took ZT years of development to get the SLT tab to be manufactured at a pace and a price that was reasonable for a production product. So
and it's only $240. Maybe he should go to ZT.
Well, again, I don't think ZT's jumping on the bandwagon of spending years developing another opening system again.
I'm just being facetious and the devil's advocate.
No,
I'll
I know.
stop. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, as far as the Spyderco, I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist, and therefore it won't bother me.
You got to at least say it's a little bit cool.
No, because...
What's your problem?
You're stoking the fire. I know it.
I am. I need you to say it. You say that if you don't have anything good to say, you won't say it. I want you to say what you're thinking.
Well, so two things. One, Josh mentioned that he wished that the opiate would be produced as well. Fuck, man. So what? There's nothing sacred about a custom maker's designs? I mean,
nothing. Nothing at all. Nothing is sacred.
Apparently not.
But think of all the production knives. They're based off of custom knives.
Right, but they're not based... But those are the only two models he has.
The sink of it. He needs to make more models.
That's also true. But the sabotage... The Spyderco sabotage is not a sabotage. There's no external stop pin. There's no flipper tab. There's a giant, stupid fucking hole drilled out of the blade now. And...
It'll be great.
We are going to give Tyler a brain aneurysm or a heart attack, or both.
Yeah.
All right.
Flippers suck.
The reason... Okay, here. I can actually... there's an analogy for this. So, I don't know how big of gamers you guys are, but like...
Huge.
So, so like World of Warcraft.
Huge.
Right? Or any MMO. Or anything like that.
Counter the hell out of this argument.
No. Anything like that. So, if you played when... You know, back in the day when nothing was fucked up yet, things were like really hard to get. And so they mattered, right? So like if you had all the best items in the game because you've been busted. No, this is great.
Because I see where you're going.
Because if you've busted your ass for months and months and you've gotten all the best stuff, everybody looks up to you. Everybody's like, "Whoa, that guy's so cool. I want to be like that guy." And like you have all the best stuff. But nowadays, if you play one of those games, everybody has access to the best stuff. It's all super easy now. You just click a button and go. So now nothing's special and nothing's sacred and nobody's cool. So if you take these knives that people fawn over on Instagram and never intend to own, but that are true grails in the real sense of the word, unobtainable for most, then if you make that available to everybody, it's not sacred anymore. It's not special anymore. It's just another design that that some people happen to make knives out of. Some of those knives cost $5,000. Some of them cost $300. But it doesn't matter, right? The design is just out there.
I agree with you. I'm going to counter with the argument. And I like that we've gotten into this just at the end of our discussion here. We're going to keep going with it. I'm going to counter with the car argument. Okay. Okay. So think about the development of cars and vehicles. Okay. The Stan Wilson non-flipper flipper is a Ferrari Formula One car. Okay? It is the highest level. It is like the best of everything. Perfectly made, high-end materials, super sleek. But that eventually will trickle down into the Toyota Corolla that you're driving. Anti-lock brakes, traction control, safety features,
So the difference is that you're talking about mechanics and I'm talking about design.
I understand, but no, it's also design, though. I mean, it's also design. And so what ends up happening is, think about it in terms of, okay, take the Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing from back in the day with the Gullwing doors. There's design for you. There are cars today, there are Mercedes SLs with that design today that cost X number of dollars, whatever, but people still revere the original ones. The original ones are going to set you back $1 million today, and you can buy a production one for $120,000.
But you're still talking about a luxury good, right? So if they made so that's like the difference between buying a $2,000 Black Snow Custom Sabotage with G10 and an Acid Wash blade versus buying an $8,000 one that's got Timascus and Damasteel. But you can't go buy a Toyota Corolla with gull-wing doors.
But you can buy a Toyota Corolla with air conditioning and headlights and traction control and a stereo,
which are all mechanics, and that's
and
like
GPS.
saying that's like getting the SLT flipper tab in the 0055. But that's not like getting the design of the
exactly
Airborne.
Though you just said it. You just said it though.
But that's
getting
mechanics.
this SLT on the 0055.
But there's no mechanics that you gain from the Black Snow, from the Sabotage. It's purely design. Spyderco is not selling you a better knife because it was designed by Natty. It's just a design.
I hear what you're saying. You're not wrong. Somewhere you're right. Okay, so you're right. I agree. But people will still revere the original one in the same way, perhaps more. I don't think that the Spyderco Nirvana hurt Peter Rosenti's work.
So I think it's important that I specify to any listeners, because you guys and I had this conversation earlier today. But I just want to be perfectly clear that I understand that my opinion is silly and due to my inflated ego.
It's real.
No, but I mean, just because somebody else can get the thing doesn't mean that I should be upset about that. But I am upset about that. But I'm just recognizing that it's irrational.
Let me say something real quick about it. Like, the thing that I always think about is Tashi Barisha. Like, he shares his designs with everybody. Everybody makes one of his knives. But for me, the ultimate thing with him is I want a knife made by him. And it's the same way, like with Peter Rosenti. For me, the fact that the Nirvana was made by Spyderco doesn't detract anything from the real deal. And the same thing with Black Snow Customs. Just the fact that somebody makes one of his knives or both of his knives, both of his models, doesn't detract the rarity or the legality, or not legality, what the hell? The specialness of having one made by him with his hands, right?
Right.
So like you used the game analogy earlier, and it's like you've got the special gear or equipment that's badass and has all this special stuff, but maybe the new dude has a skin that looks like it but doesn't have any of the special shit that makes it cool. It's not a level 300 fucking helmet. It's a level 2 helmet that kind of looks like yours, but it's not as special.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I don't think it's gonna mess it up. I understand. Tyler just doesn't want people to have nice things, so that's fine.
Right. Correct. That is exactly yes.
He wants all the nice things.
I like exclusivity. I've lived a life, I guess, that makes me like exclusivity. Yeah.
That's fair. That's a fair point, man. It's well taken. It's totally reasonable.
We're gonna call this section Tyler's Tangent.
Fair. That's good. The end. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. This was a delightful conversation. We're going to go ahead and wrap up episode 4. Definitely really happy with everything that we got to cover. And if you guys ever want to find me, you can do so on YouTube, TovarishWorks. You can do so on Instagram at TovarishWorks. And you can email me at tovarishworks@gmail.com. Frank, where can we find you?
You can find me on YouTube as Dr. Frunkey. Also on Instagram at Dr. Frunkey. I'm happy to receive any direct messages there. And you can email me at drfrunkey@gmail.com.
And Josh.
I go by Echo Does Knives on Instagram. You can always DM me over there. And also, the podcast itself has an email, thenifecast@gmail.com. If you guys have any questions or comments, please email us at that email address and let us know what you think about the podcast.
To expand on that,
the podcast also has an Instagram.
yes.
Oh, that's right.
So to expand on that, it's got the Instagram. Yeah, at the Knifecast. And then also feel free to ask us questions that we can use in Q&As. So we do want to start answering community questions at the end of each episode. So we'll get some of those banked up so we can start doing that. So if you guys want to ask us any questions or hear our thoughts on anything or have any recommendations for topics that you want to hear, then go ahead and hit us up on that email or on that Instagram. Thanks so much, guys. It was an absolute pleasure, and we will see you next time.